Today, we become legends.
There's no better feeling than putting your bronze teammates in your backpack and carrying them to a victory. Well, these 10 gods are the best hypercarries in Smite that can get you that feeling on demand. Hypercarry is a fairly loosely defined term, but in general means a god that scales very heavily with items, has a weak early game but a monstrous late game that allows them to carry the game much harder than your standard carry gods. They have insane damage and can offer and kill several enemy gods in one fight on their own without breaking a sweat. Many hypercarries are fairly easy to shut down in the early to mid game, but once they get to late game with a full build, they are not easily shut down at all, often running through entire fights on their own in the right situation. So in short, hypercarry gods are weak early to mid game, insanely strong late game, high damage, and not easy to shut down in a team fight. We're currently getting hit by storms in the UK where I live, and what better to pass the time sat inside than building your team, taking down epic bosses, and getting all the loot. That's right, today's sponsor is the legendary RPG on mobile and PC, Raid Shadow Legends. And today I wanted to share with you my personal top 5 lists of my favourite design champions from the game. Number 5, Ignatius from the Orgrin tribes. He was one of my main guys for going through the campaign, so I've got a little bit of an attachment to him at this point. Mountain King from the Dwarves at number 4. Number 3, Ruel the Huntmaster from the Dark Elves. Number 2, Samar Gemcurse from the Dwarves again. I just had to include 2 Dwarves, they look so cool. And Uros the Soul Cage from the Undead, who just looks damn badass. Looking through the champion list to find the strongest champions to take down the hardest bosses is what really draws me back to Raid. The sheer amount of options between your actual champion choice, gear, level, etc. makes for a really different experience every time that I do enjoy in Raid. As always, there's a ton of new events going on in Raid this month, like a fresh rotation of the deadly but rewarding Hydra boss, as well as tournaments and more. If you want a big head start in Raid, hit the link in the description to get a free champion, Vergis, 200k silver, an XP booster, and more. If you're a new player, you can claim these rewards for the next 30 days only. I wish you luck, and I'll catch you in the Raid. So with all that out of the way, let's jump in with number 10. So the least hyper of these carries is Xbalanque. In days of old, Xbal would have been a bit higher on this list, but he's taken a big nerf to his ultimate since then, as well as other gods have sprung up that simply do the hypercarry job a bit better than he does. With that said, he is still an absolute monster in the late game with some of the strongest basic attacks of any hunter, given the extra bola damage and effect, plus the ult almost doubles his basic attack range for the duration. The one area of being a hypercarry that Xbal doesn't excel at is survivability. He has no built-in healing and a dash can only get you so far. He has to pretty much rely on lifesteal from items and or killing the opponent faster than they can kill him, which he is great at in late game team fights, to be honest. Our next entry is on the hunt for a pentakill, and her boar is coming with her. That's right, it's Artemis at number 9. Another hunter, so all the same points from Xbalanque still apply, amazing sustained damage from auto attacks late game, strong lifesteal, great item scaling, etc. However, Artemis is slightly stronger as a hypercarry in my opinion because she's harder to shut down once she gets rolling and has an insane attack speed steroid at 80%. Between Tusky and her traps, Artemis has a bit more lockdown than Xbal, which can also be used defensively when she's getting dived. Artemis has some of the strongest damage out there once she gets a full build, a well-deserved number 9. The number 8 spot has been eaten by Bakasura, so I guess he can have this placement? Nah, but on a real, Bakasura is definitely a contender among the hypercarries. His shred is something that every Smite player has experienced at least once or twice. That true damage is no joke. At 2.5 attack speed, Butcher Blades can deal up to 1120 true damage that completely ignores your protections if they're just left-click doubling you with Haste and Katana. Oh, and if you get trapped in a Bakasura without beads or Aegis, you're absolutely going to be in for a bad time. The number 7 spot has been usurped by Set, one of the newer releases on this list and definitely a strong contender when it comes to hypercarrying. While Set might not quite match the damage output of some hunters over long periods, he has stronger bursts, comes online faster, and has a lot more durability than most hunters do. His ult almost seems like it was made as a hypercarry style snowball ability that once Set gets rolling in a fight is kind of over. The speed to stick to people, the uncapped passive attack speed, the healing, all this just allows Set to completely run over teams if he gets a lead. At number 6 on the list we have the queen of pentakills herself, Scylla. Now, burst mages aren't typically considered for hypercarry status because their damage is by nature bursty as opposed to sustainable. Sustained damage is pretty much necessary to run through an entire team. If you used all your cooldowns killing 2 guys and have to wait 15 seconds before you can do damage again, it isn't really hyper at all. Scylla though is an exception in my eyes due to her resettable ultimate. A good Scylla using Armor Monster can get enough value out of it that she can match the damage of many of these more basic attack focused gods. It also helps that Scylla's 1-2 combo is on a base 10-second cooldown for both abilities and pretty much one-shots people in the late game. That's 6 seconds with full CDR, so she can actually put out more damage than you would think purely because of her low cooldowns and insanely high scalings. Dragging himself into the number 5 spot, we have Ao Kuang. a magical assassin who packs an insane punch with an auto attack build in the late game. His Dragon Call alone can do 570 base and 180% magical power. He's no stranger to enemies disappearing before his eyes. While his damage is less consistent than a hunter, for example, since he relies on cooldowns for his damage a lot more than a hunter does late game, he is definitely harder to shut down in a fight than most hunters. With his stealth mobility to get in and around the fight, insane burst damage, and execute that heals plus resets his position in the fight so he can go on to another enemy and keep shredding, or even just tactically reposition to continue fighting. Alquang also always builds lifesteal, which is particularly effective on his Dragon Call since it's single target and doesn't suffer from the 1/3 AoE lifesteal multiplier like many mage abilities do. Overall, a really strong hypercarry. At number 4 we have Freya, a magical ADC that acts much like a hunter does but deals magical damage. Her 2 steroids in Pulse and Irradiate combine with strong item scaling from rings and lifesteal to create an absolute late game monster. Her ult does a surprising amount of damage too at 920 plus 140% of power. That's more than most burst mage ultimates, and she also gets the benefit of the self banish to buy some time for Irradiate and Pulse to come off cooldown. Given their base cooldowns are only 5 and 6 seconds respectively. The ult self-banishes for 3.6 seconds, so with good timing you pretty much get a reset on her 2 steroids for free. And we all know that Freya with both steroids up can run through entire teams if left unchecked. Accelerating into the top 3 we have Kronos, another magical ADC with insane item scaling and strong late game basic attacks for sustained damage output. Kronos, unlike Freya, is always ranged and doesn't need a steroid to do so. His actual steroid is one of the best in the game with tons of movement speed, attack speed, and one of 4 powerful side effects for 7 seconds. 7! Most steroids in Smite last 5 seconds tops, and since the ability goes on cooldown when you use it, the 15-second cooldown is actually 8 seconds from when the buff ends. Kronos' ultimate, Rewind, is pretty much a get out of jail free card and can even be a full heal in the right scenario, and hell, if you needed any more evidence for Kronos' insane late game, his passive literally gives him 125 free power the longer the game goes on. Also, one thing I haven't touched on much is structure damage. If you're gonna hypercarry the game, it also helps to be able to shred towers, and Kronos is arguably the best god in the game for that since his basic attacks are magical and don't suffer from as bad a penalty to tower damage that physical basic attacks do. The reason for this is because physical basic attacks scale at 100% of power and magical basic attacks scale much less, but that kind of mechanic stuff is outside the scope of this video, so moving on. At number 2 we have the one punch man himself, Mercury. When you see frequent videos of a god landing 2k crits in the late game, it's probably safe to say that type of god can hypercarry, and boy can he. With one of the strongest attack speed per level scalings of any god and a 70% attack speed steroid in his kit, Mercury can hit 2.18 attack speed without building a single bit of it through items. This allows Mercury to build into high crit, high power items and only a little bit of attack speed and still get away with it. Meaning his basic attacks simply hit harder than most other basic attack gods because they all have to build attack speed. You don't, you just slam down power and crit. Mercury is also by nature very mobile with bonus ground speed, a dash, and the ultimate for getting into and around fights to kill your next unfortunate victim on the enemy team. Mercury is a risky one, but if that risk pays off, he can do some of the strongest late game carrying there is. So quickly before we get to number 1, I have a few honourable mentions. Nemesis, great basic attacks, protection shred, and that insane shield. Olarun, a magical ADC with strong basic attacks, a good steroid, and the ability to slow time for enemies and speed it up for himself, increasing his DPS. Rama, just a strong late game hunter with the potential to hypercarry in the right game. And Vamana, just to have at least one tank on the list. Nah, for real though, an ulting Vamana with Hastened and Kins running at you is pretty damn scary in the late game. But without further ado, the number 1 best hypercarry god in Smite is Kali. Yeah, was anyone expecting anything else at number 1? Kali has some of the strongest late game basic attack shred there is, with her basic attack chain of 1, 0.5, 0.5 damage and swing time. She gets more basic attacks out per second with the same attack speed compared to a god with a slower chain of 1, 1.5, 1.5 or something like that. This makes her one of the best kin size users in the game, and that combined with 2.5 attack speed and tons of pen, both from items and her passive mark, and Kali can shred literally anyone in the late game. I've seen even full tank solo laners melt in 2 or 3 seconds under a full build Kali. But not only does she have great sustainable DPS, she is also the hardest god to shut down in the game when she gets on a roll due to her full healing after every kill and literally not be able to die for 4.5 seconds using her ultimate. When it takes late game Kali 3 seconds to kill even the tankiest target, 4.5 seconds is more than enough time for her to shred down her target, full heal, and continue her hypercarry rampage through the enemy team. But that's it from me on this one. Let me know what you think of my placements in the comments down below, and don't forget to drop a like on the video before you leave, it really helps me out. Subscribe for more videos like this. Subscribe for more videos just like this 3 times a week, and I'll catch you guys in another one later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.